Hello, I'm Jax Wheatley, and I'm an out entrepreneur.
Hello, Out Bosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. On this week's episode, we are welcoming back to the studio friend of the show, Jax Wheatley. As many of you know, Jax was first interviewed on episode 85 of the show, and they are here live in our Portland, Oregon studios. So Jax, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. Just a quick question. Are you ready to inspire fellow out bosses?
Absolutely.
Very nice. So if you didn't check episode 85, here's a little background about Jax. Jax is the chief financial officer every small business owner needs. With over 18 years running their own business, Rainbow Tax and Accounting, Jax loves providing quality, affordable accounting services to individuals, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations. When not busy running their own business, Jax dedicates their free time to expanding economic opportunities to serving as the board president for PABA, Portland's LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. Jax, since we've already had you on the show before, I wanted to switch things up and host a kind of quasi office hours, CPA office hours with you, where we can support small business owners, LGBT bosses, really understand the new tax code. So just for context, in case you have been living under a rock somewhere, on December 22nd, 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act received its stamp of approval from the last U.S. Congress, led by former House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. So Jax, this new tax reform has a lot of us wondering what's going to be different in the 2019 tax season. I know that the law itself is 600 plus pages. Many of us don't have time to read through that. I'm sure many CPAs don't even have time to read through that. So can you give us, just small business owners, keeping us in mind, just a better understanding of a few of the basics of how this new law it can help us or hurt us, and what's it going to do to the economy as a whole?
So for the small business owner, a lot of the biggest change that most people have probably already heard about is the fact that you can no longer take meals off to take clients out or people that are potential clients. The meal deduction is completely gone. It used to be a 50% deduction. What's interesting is, however, you can still do entertainment. So I could take somebody out to a show, and if it happened to include dinner, that's great. But if I just take them out to dinner, I can't take a deduction at all. So there's some really, and that's one of the things that is, there are nitpicky areas where it's really a matter of semantics and making sure that you're doing the right kind of promotional type activity in order for your deductions to be qualified. The other real strong drawback that happened is it used to be that, especially for our entrepreneurs who have larger companies who aren't what we call solopreneurs, who actually have employees, maybe have a physical location, maybe even have 2 or 3 physical locations. We used to be able to have staff meetings and take off the cost of staff meetings. We can no longer do that at all. So if I, as a business owner, say I'm going to provide lunch for my team on Saturdays, which I do during tax season, that's no longer a business deduction for me. That's just, I'm doing that because it's the right thing to do because I'm asking my team to give up their Saturdays for 4 months. And that's a real disadvantage when it comes to trying to provide a little bit more for our employees than just giving them a paycheck, which is something I firmly believe in. And I think it is going to affect the small business owners because I think a lot of the reason that people will work for a smaller company and not get as big a paycheck is because they're more valued and they have these little small things that actually mean a lot to them.
Yeah, and it's an ecosystem too. So, you're the small business owner, you're taking care of your staff, by buying them lunch or something like that, but you're also supporting another business as well that's providing the lunch. So
absolutely,
it kind of goes against stimulating the economy, I guess, but I'm trying to wrap my head around what this all means. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that the deduction piece about meals versus entertainment. In my mind, I had it the other way around. So it's good to have you here. This is really nice.
Yes, I know.
So whether or not we're solo proprietors or, a different form of business owner, we're all super familiar with the 1040 form. And in the new tax code, they have what's called the 1040 simplified. And when I was kind of reading about it and learning more about it, it's half the size. Visually, it looks really different. It seems like a mixed bag of whether it's more simple or not. And so, it seems like there's different versions of it, just like the 1040. But, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, from what I've seen so far, I've done quite a few what I call mock returns. As we're going through the last months of 2018, we were doing tax planning for some of our larger clients to make sure that we made some good decisions for them at the end of the year because there were so many changes. And so we kind of put the numbers in the computer as if we were doing a tax return. So I've seen some of the forms. And yes, the new 1040 is this half-page document, but behind them are a lot more schedules that we used to have. Whereas we used to have a form that had some 60 lines on it. Now we have a form that has about 30 lines on it, but we've also now got at least 3, maybe 4 kind of additional pages or half pages. They seem to have decided that half pages are a good thing to do in the tax return that have to go along with the 1040. So I have not seen yet where the simplification came in from the tax return itself for anybody who's a business owner or has any kind of unusual type. And, we, as you well know, we're very much in, especially in the Portland metro area, what we call a gig economy, where I've got, people who are driving Uber, people who are renting out a room as Airbnb out of their house, and they maybe have a part-time job at a Starbucks or something, and they are not going to have a more simplified tax return. They're actually going to have a more complicated tax return because things that used to be fairly simple are now much more complicated, and we have to track things differently. So it's a mixed bag as far as that is concerned.
Okay. All right. That's what it seems like from the research that I've done. Yeah. It seems like a mixed bag. It's shorter. Yeah. So maybe there's less items to fill out, but there's more kind of back end, as you said, the schedules that go along with that.
That's correct. There's very much definitely more back end client stuff, information that I don't even know if they know how to process it yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Which that's a whole nother episode if we wanted to talk about that. But yeah.
And they actually have to be there to process that. So at the time of this recording, the government is still shut down. So hopefully. So another big change here is that many are upset about the personal exemption. It can't be claimed for the 2018 tax year. So maybe I got that wrong. But can you please explain what this means, who it will help, who it will hurt, and how this does or does not impact a person's business?
So the personal exemption, it was actually left in the tax code, but what they did was they set the dollar amount to 0. Where last year, when you filed your 2017 tax return in early 2018, you had a $4,050 personal exemption for yourself and any dependents you had. So a spouse, children, if you're supporting your one of your parents, whatever it may have been. And each one of those dependents was worth $4,000 basically of tax-free income to you. Now, each one of those dependents is worth nothing. There are some tax credits that are, if you're in a lower income status, they're available to you, but not everyone can qualify for those. The other thing they did was they doubled the standard deduction, changing it from $6,000 to $12,000 and from $12,100 to $24,000 for a married couple. The drawback is that what I'm finding is that they also, what they did is limited what they call your state and local taxes, which most people have well over $10,000 if they live in a blue state, which we're being recorded in Oregon, which is a blue state. So a lot of my clients they may have gotten a $24,000 standard deduction, whereas last year they had maybe $32,000 of itemized deductions. Mm-hmm. But now, because this year that's that limit on the tax, they're going to just get the $24,000. Yeah. They may have had $16,000 of income that was taken off for dependents. So mostly this is affecting my couples with kids. Now, so that if you do the math, they're actually going to be paying tax on about $8,000 more. And their tax rate may have gone down 1 or 2%, but probably not more than that.
Got it. No, that's really helpful. At first, it seems like a wash a little bit. If they've increased the standard deduction, but the personal exemption goes away. But like you said, like once you kind of like just put pen to paper and do the math, it's like, wait a second, there's more going to taxes now, more income.
Most of
Yeah.
my single folks who are not what we call high income are actually going to do a little bit better, who don't have dependents. They're just a single person. If they're renting, it's really, the new tax code is really a disincentive for home ownership, which, if you talk about it's supposed to be the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, well, we just now have taken away the incentive to own a house. So what does that do to the construction industry?
Yeah.
What does that do to people who are in the mortgage lending business? What does that do to real estate people if we have a disincentive for people to buy property?
And so the disincentive to purchase a home is because the mortgage is not, the interest on the mortgage is not being.
The interest on the mortgage is still tax deductible, but when you limit the state and local taxes to $10,000, there's very few, especially a married couple, their standard deduction is $24,000. With that cap on the state and local taxes, pretty much they're not going to be able to itemize unless they buy a house that's several $1 million in debt, which is not who the tax code is supposed to help.
Okay, so I'm seeing a trend here of who it's likely to help and who it's not likely to help. Here's one thing that it seems like it may work in favor if you're kind of cash flush in a business for retirement, right? So, and this is something I discovered working with my financial advisor. So say you're saving away in either a Roth IRA or a SEP, right? Like you have to decide which, like in the past, you had to decide which you would put money in for that year.
That's correct.
And so if you're more cash flush, maybe you would go with the SEP because it's a little bit higher than the cap on a traditional or on a Roth IRA, which is about $5,500, right? Like now you can do both. You can put money in both a Roth IRA and a SEP.
Well, you've actually always been able to do that.
Oh, you have? Okay. All right. Well, there you go. This is
you
why
actually
we
have always been able to do that.
Okay.
But you're limited. The total amount between the two cannot be any more than your SEP is allowed. So it's not like the IRA is on top of the SEP.
Gotcha.
So, it's SEPs are an interesting creature.
But wait, isn't that the change though? That you can go up to the limit of the SEP, and then you can also contribute to the Roth IRA.
Depending upon your income level, yes, that is a potential now, which wasn't there before.
Gotcha. And then it goes back to income level, right?
Correct.
To be cash flush and to be in that position to do that.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
One of the big wins for the two big wins for small business owners were that now pretty much everything used to be anything under a capital type asset, a computer or a truck or not a truck. Cars are a different animal, but you used to be able to write off anything up to $2,500 a piece, just write it off and not even have to itemize it. And now that's pretty much unlimited in the Section 179 issues because you can now write off up to $1 million of assets in a year.
Wow.
So, and they've also beefed up what they call bonus depreciation, which has a better in the future tax advantage to you. So at this point, any asset you buy, you can pretty much write it completely off.
Wow. Up to $1 million. So,
with the bonus. Yeah. Most of our small business owners and most of the people listening to us probably are not spending over $1 million in assets, right? Yeah. The other big win is that there's this new, unless you're in an exempted category, which I could talk about in a minute, there's 20% of your net income as a self-employed individual will not be subject to federal and state income tax. State income tax being in Oregon. If you're not in Oregon, you'll have to check with about your own state. Oregon didn't co-adopt the federal requirement, the federal thing.
They did or they didn't?
They did.
They did.
They did. Yes, in Oregon they did. That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said unless you're in an exempted category, what does that mean?
So an exempted category is a doctor, a lawyer, pretty much a licensed professional of just about any type. Okay. Doctors, lawyers, financial advisors qualify. What's interesting is that there's certain professionals that don't, that still get it. Like real estate agents still get the 20% deduction. Engineers and architects still get the 20% deduction. But so myself as a CPA, I'm not eligible for it.
Okay.
My clients who are doctors who are not eligible for it. That 20% deduction, just if you are in that situation, and we were talking about SEPs, which are self-employed retirement plans, if you are going to do some kind of SEP, you're going to want to make sure you're talking to your tax professional, because there is a fine line between, if you do the SEP, then part of that 20%, they kind of, you can't do both to 100%. There are some checks and balances to that.
Okay.
Because that would essentially say, somebody could say, oh, I'm not going to pay tax on 40% of my income, which is not what they intended.
Right. Yeah. Although, there's always loopholes, right? Maybe.
Oh, the loopholes are fun. From a professional standpoint and from my own personal standpoint, I've been taking classes, pretty much 2 and 3 classes a week since at least October. I'll learn something new every class, and I learn how much I don't know every class, which is kind of fun. But the other side of it is that because of the way the Tax Act was written, there are a lot of ways to, if you are financially, it's another one of these cash, you have to have the cash to do it, where you can move cash around in various different ways, 100% legal, and also avoids tax. So they made the game
example of that?
A little bit more exciting for me.
Yeah.
So one example of that is, say you have a kid who's 10, 11, 12, something like that, your child working for you in your business. You can pay them up to $12,000 a year, 100% write off for the business, and they will pay 0 tax.
Because they're your kid, or
because of the standard deduction.
I see.
And we don't, because they're your kid, you don't have to pay Social Security and Medicare taxes on them on the payroll. So I've got a couple of clients who the parents are in the 37% tax bracket, which is the highest tax bracket there is now. The kids are getting paid $12,000, paying 0%. I just saved them 37% of $12,000.
Wow.
So yeah. So there's some fun things I can do like that. And we figured out this one very interesting, we can have the kid work in especially like college age students, have your kid work for you during the summer. Don't have them go work for somebody else, have them work for you. Yeah. Put that money into a savings account, then pay their tuition next year that you're going to pay anyway out of their savings account.
Yes. All right.
So you're making them work for their tuition.
Okay. So these are good gems. So for all the outbosses out there, if you have kids, they're super smart, you want them engaged in your business, here's a way to not only help you and your business, help your kid get some skills, but also save some money for whether they want to go to college, vocational school, whatever they want to do, after they're out of the house. So these are just kids up until the age of 18, or like what's the...
It could be any kid.
Really?
Right. Up until the 18 is what saves us the Social Security and Medicare. After 18, you're going to have to pay Social Security and Medicare. Yeah. But if you're like my one client whose that percentage is 7.65%, his income tax percentage is 37%. That's almost 30% savings.
Wow. Okay.
So that makes
this is why we're having office hours right now, because I don't understand this stuff. So this is great. Thank you for that.
But you also have to remember too, those are some of the higher end folks. It's just like every other tax code. I've had 4 major tax codes in my career. They're all the same. They're billed for, this is my one and only political announcement, they're billed for the middle class to do better for the middle class. And they really help people who are in the upper tax brackets, who have the ability and the cash to do these kind of move the money around legally into different places and pay less taxes.
Right. So for strategies, let's talk about this. So you often talk about tax planning, the importance of that. So for our listeners, what's some advice to help them prepare for this upcoming, we're in the thick of tax season when this episode goes out. So, potentially, how could you help us, save us from kind of costly mistakes right now in this moment?
Well, the first thing I can do for most either out entrepreneurs or out bosses is that will save on costly mistakes is absolutely make your employees fill out new W-4 forms. They don't want to. They say it doesn't matter. It hasn't changed. They have to. Because the tax code has changed that dramatically that they need to take a look. And if they need to talk to somebody, especially if you're a larger company, talk to a local CPA or a local tax preparer even, and ask them to come in to a staff meeting and talk to your employees about it. It's huge. I predict what's going to happen is, we hear a lot about people being upset about that. Oh, they're saying no refunds are going to go out. very few people are actually going to get refunds this year because they didn't have enough taxes withheld.
Wow.
So it's not as big a problem as people are making it out to be, that the refunds are not going to go out until later. But it's hard. There's not much we can do for what happened in 2018. That tax planning has to happen before December 31st.
Okay.
But it is important to know what you can and can't deduct. So if I were if I were an out entrepreneur in any other profession than the one I am in, where I didn't know taxes, even if I've been doing my taxes forever myself for years, I would seek professional advice this year.
Okay.
Even though it means I may have to pay some money.
Yep. So definitely for those of the out bosses tuning in, if you have staff, go ahead and take a look at those W-4 forms and do the paperwork. And then also, it's a good idea to get some tax advice this year.
Absolutely.
And I will take that myself. So with that, we're going to go to a quick sponsorship break. And when we come back, we're going to learn more from Jax and our CPA office hours. Hey, out bosses. Rhodes Perry here. As you all know, part of my passion for this podcast is to empower you and fellow LGBT entrepreneurs to cultivate a feeling of purpose and belonging in your business. To know that you can show up and be the most authentic version of yourself. Purpose, belonging, and workplace culture are concepts I take seriously in my own consulting business. In fact, I'm on a mission to empower leaders just like you and those on their way to joining us to cultivate cultures of belonging. In my upcoming book, Belonging at Work, I share some of my personal struggles of coming out as a trans guy in the workplace and how I leverage this experience as one of my business superpowers. Now, I'm on a mission to support you in taking simple actions that will make a world of difference for anyone who has ever felt as if they needed to hide important aspects of themselves on the job. When you commit to purchasing a special, limited edition copy of the book, a portion of your purchase will support expanding workplace opportunities for fellow transgender and non-binary people. An added bonus, your story about what it means to belong at work will be featured on the book's website to inspire others. You're ready to belong at work now. To learn more, visit rhodesonamazon.com or text 444-999 and type the word belong. Again, that's rhodesonamazon.com or text 444-999 and type belong. Okay, Jax. So one last question on this, and then I want to kind of pivot and talk more about what we talked about the last time about coming out as non-binary in your business. So I'm excited to talk about that. But this last question for you in your business right now, this is a really complicated time for everyday business owners like myself. So what has your heart singing? What makes you excited about waking up and being a CPA in this moment of radical change in our tax code?
I think it is because I have to rethink about all the advice I've given my business owners over the years because everything I kind of got complacent in a lot of ways because the tax code had been the same for so many years. We could count on this is the way that it's always been. And this is where now with this new tax code, there are some of the things that we kind of hung our hat on as valid deductions are now gone. But there are other new deductions. Mm-hmm. And so it's the learning for me that is exciting. And I kind of wish I'd have been able to get more excited about it earlier in the year, but it's really hard to get excited because they haven't actually, most of the regulation they haven't even figured out all the rules behind them. The IRS has to set rules behind everything in that 600-page document. And I was on a webinar yesterday and they said about 25% of the new tax code actually has its rules on how to implement it. So I've got 75% of the tax code that I'm not real sure. I can read you the words, but I'm not sure if I know exactly what Congress meant by that. So that's the exciting part is figuring out which is the best for my clients and then explaining to them, okay, since we don't have guidance, this is how I read it. Are you comfortable with it? Are you not? Shall we? I predict I'm going to have way more clients on extension this year where we will actually be filing their returns and paying any tax we think they might owe. We actually won't press send on the tax return. We'll wait until later in the year because we have all the way until October to file the tax return. And by October, we should have some guidelines for pretty much most of the 600-page tax code. Yeah. And then we can know we're filing accurate returns. So that's the thing that is fun for me this year, which seems very wrong in so many ways.
Right.
But
well, it's lighting up a new part of your brain, right? I mean,
it is.
if you've been giving kind of the same advice for years and years and years, it's like anything. It's like, okay, I can kind of do this in my sleep. And now it's like everything has changed, and the deck is definitely stacked against kind of the middle class, low income folks in lots of different ways. So, I'm sure that for the clients that you work with, especially in the gig economy here in Portland, what are the ways that you can really look out for folks? And if anyone can do it, I think you can. And it's really complicated, right? So
it totally is complicated, yes.
So thank you for walking us through that. I know that for our listeners, that's a lot of tax talk, but I think it's important, especially as you're thinking about keeping your business going, making sure it's thriving. So now, I want to pivot and again, kind of go back to kind of talking about what brings you to the Rainbow family. And the last time we talked, we went through kind of the basic questions that I usually ask guests. And the episode came out in August. So again, that's episode 85. And at that point, you were just coming out as being openly non-binary as a business owner, right? So tell us how things are going since that time and how your coming out has impacted how you show up in your business now.
So this year has been a lot about learning, even for myself, what the identity of non-binary is. I've always known it my whole life, that I was never 100% male, never 100% female, and I never will be.
Right.
But to actually have a name for it and something that I could kind of go into the world with has been very eye-opening for me. One of the things that I've found is like at the office now, we have a lot of literature about even something simple as there's a book about the use of they and them as pronouns. It's a very small little cartoon-like book, and it's incredibly interesting the number of folks that come in from all over the spectrum, because I have lots of clients from in all ages, all kinds of orientations and things, and to have them just in the 10 minutes they're waiting for me, read that booklet, and then it sparks a conversation when they come into the office. Like I had one guy that was talking to me about, he says like, this booklet really helped me. He's got a son who's now a junior in high school. And he said, and these kids are now coming to my house and I'm trying to be supportive and I'm trying to understand, his son definitely identifies as male. He said, but some of his friends are non-binary and this is a new concept to me. So it's nice that because we're so open about it in the office, it allows people a safe place to talk about their own experiences growing in that arena, which has been and I've been shocked I've had a couple of new clients come in who are very traditional, heterosexual, cis couples, and to have them, and even on the older side, which means to me, older side is older than me, which is older than 60, want to talk about it and want to be open and want to understand what non-binary means in the world.
Yeah.
And what it means in our office even.
Right.
So that's been kind of really cool to watch.
Yeah. What's amazing too is that, your clients trust you so much, right? So especially for folks that, we're in Portland, right? So if you're a parent or a grandparent and you're around kids in high school or younger, inevitably someone in the friend group may be non-binary, right? And so trying to understand and respect that child or a teenager, whoever that might be, and knowing, oh my gosh, my CPA is totally out as non-binary, totally comfortable. Not that it's your job to educate, but kind of going into your office and there's literature that kind of opens up the conversation. People are safe. They feel safe with you, and you're kind of serving as an educator when you want to. Is there ever a time where, you're kind of just in tax mode and you're doing your thing where you're just like, I don't want to be the one to educate? Have you got to that point yet? Or are you still excited to share the good word?
Ask me in March.
Yeah, right.
But for the most part, no, I'm actually very thankful to be able to, I do find it's interesting when I'm going places and I'm much more sensitive to myself being referred to as either male or female.
Yeah.
It's like, I recently joined a new gym because it's January. That's what you do in January, right? You join a gym. And, the woman behind the counter referred to me as she, and I stopped and I said they. And it's like, if you can't be okay with this, then this is not the right gym for me.
Yes.
And because she looked at my outward appearance and assumed what gender I wanted to be called.
Right.
I mean, there's a local restaurant here that I've seen where it's a sign on the register and it says something to the effect of, and I have to figure out where it is because I want to get one myself, that says, "Don't assume our gender. If you're curious, ask."
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And it's like, oh, if you're curious, ask. And that's kind of the attitude that we have. And like even in our office, I've taken the position of, because I have some older people that work with me and they're like, well, what do we do? And I said, well, here's what I think we should do is that unless we absolutely know they have a preference, either use their first name or default to non-binary. Use the they.
Yeah. Yeah.
And kind of to try and get people used to that, rather than me making an assumption about you, I'm going to go to something more neutral, which I'm really liking how that feels. And it tends to make people feel more comfortable.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because I think like my guidance when people say, well, what do I do when I'm not certain? I'm like, just use the name, because as a trans guy, I use male pronouns, he and him. And it's interesting when people find out that I'm trans, that's when they start theying me. And I'm like, wait. Like, you were right. You got it right. So it's like, it's really about really getting to know each individual person. And there's nothing sweeter than the sound of your own name. So it's like, just get the name right and you'll be okay. And then once you build trust with a person, you could really get a sense of who they are and, talk about pronouns when you feel like it's appropriate. But it's tricky, it's really tricky. And we're here in Portland. So, the fact that you're going to a gym and someone at the front desk, like they're the extension, they're like the welcoming committee. And if they can't get that right from the beginning, it's like, oh man, what did I sign up for here?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I do happen to live in the suburbs, so we'll give Portland credit. I do happen to live in the suburbs.
You're in Oregon,
okay? But I am in Oregon, yeah. And what's interesting is the person in the office that has the hardest time with the gender neutral or even pronouns in general is my partner.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Someone that has the hardest time with it,
totally,
and
totally.
And especially friends of ours that we've been part of their transition journey.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that are the hardest because we go from years of being a certain person. And I'm finding more what the issue tends to be in my office is for my whole life, I've gone by the name Jackie.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now my preferred name for you to call me is Jax.
Yep.
And there's a certain population of my clients that's never going to make that switch over. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yep.
But most of my newer clients and people really are trying to honor calling me Jax instead of calling me Jackie. But somebody I've known for 50 years, they're going to mess up.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. Or somebody who's been my client for 25 years, they're going to mess up.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's totally like those kind of like historical relationships that you have for decades, right? So your family, like I think of my parents, there's a gentle grace period. And as long as there's effort in trying,
exactly,
it's like, okay, I know that you're trying, stop apologizing, just get it, move on, But yeah, versus like, if it's something very intentional and when that's happening too. But that's really good to hear. I mean, it seems like it's been about half a year, so I'm excited to continue this conversation and have you back again at some point when we're all frazzled about taxes. You can be the tax whisperer and we can chat more about non-binary identities.
I wanted to say something about that. I wanted to say is that there was you were there, so what happened. But in October, we had this meeting here in Portland, and I heard something at that meeting that really helped me a lot that it was a concept I hadn't really heard about. And it was a gentleman who got up in the meeting and said, I think he said he had 100 employees, and he was certain not one of them was non-binary.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's that... I had this kind of, it really is important for me to say I'm non-binary, for other folks to say they're non-binary, because there's this perception of that it's not real or that it doesn't exist because no one's come out and said that out loud.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But it's interesting when in my client base, how many of my clients are non-binary.
Yeah. Yeah. That example just reminds me, like when I used to live in DC, I did a lot of LGBT advocacy on the Hill, and we would go to different senators' offices or representatives' offices, no matter where they were, and it inevitably would be kind of maybe in a more rural area. But these elected officials would be so confident of like, why are you here? We have no LGBT people in our district or in our state, and it's like, are you kidding me? So I mean, that was at a time where we didn't have as much data as we do now, but it's just the power of personal relationships. And just if you're safe enough, if it's not going to compromise your job security, whatever, which is all very important. But if you're in that position where you can say who you are, it really does change hearts and minds. And you're doing that. I mean, with the amount of clients that you have, just being yourself and being patient, educating people, bringing them along really does a lot to dispel myths and also just humanize who we are. And I think that leads nicely into this next question that I have for you, which is kind of going back at the last time we talked about LGBT superpowers and how we leverage them in business. And you had mentioned what you loved about being LGBT as a business owner is that you are embraced by our community, by our rainbow family, and that you're accepted for who you are. You're seen as a full human being. And I'm curious, that seems, as I was listening, I was like, oh, there's so much more to this question. And I want to continue to pick your brain on this. And now that you're back, I'm curious, from your perspective, in addition to that, what other superpowers have maybe you've noticed, especially since being out as someone who is non-binary?
One of the things I've noticed, especially within our local LGBTQ community, is that whether it's the non-binary or if it's just a part of who my personality is, that I have friends and contacts on all ends of the spectrum. And a good example is I was having a conversation with my personal trainer who is very much a lesbian. And I was talking to her about I do this wrestling once a month with a bunch of awesome, awesome gay men. And she's like, I don't really have many gay men friends. And I realized that part of, I think, because of my non-binary-ness, for lack of a better word, I have this huge, long spectrum of friends, really good friends that I feel comfortable talking about guy things with the guys and girl things with the girls. And from that, I've noticed this new superpower of being able kind of to bring different types of people together.
Yeah.
That I hadn't noticed before. Is that, and I'm introducing this person who doesn't really have a whole lot of gay male friends to this other group of guys that are so accepting and open. And she's like, oh my God, they're wonderful human. So I'm breaking down some of those barriers because our community, I don't know how it's been in other places, but to some extent in Portland, it's been pretty much siloed in each of those letters of the alphabet.
Yes.
And I seem to kind of go across that and say, no, this is we have an alphabet soup and we're all in the bowl together. Let's be in the bowl together.
Yes.
Let's get to know the other people in the bowl.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, you're bringing relationships that you've had in the past, you're building new ones, and the fact that you're a kick-ass business owner here that has many clients, I mean, you interface with a lot of different people. And I think that's really key. It makes sense to me. It makes sense that it's like this to be someone who's non-binary, or I mean, I would say kind of broadly under the trans umbrella, having a different experience of more than one gender, whatever those genders are, allows you to be a good translator for different human experiences, which I think leads into this next question that I have for you, which is that, we both really strongly believe in giving back to our communities. And, it's clear you're the president of the local LGBT Chamber of Commerce. We're both engaged with a project called PDX TransWorks Project, which is all about expanding economic opportunities to trans and non-binary people. And, in doing this work, I'm curious for you, this is a big question that I'm thinking through. It's like, how do we change the perception of employers in the workplace of moving past, we have to develop these policies or change our practices, because if we don't, and I'm talking about in the context of supporting and welcoming trans people, if we don't do this, these employees are a liability and will get sued. How do we change that mindset to shift it to, like what you said, seeing trans and non-binary people as an asset to a workplace, because we are these translators, because we have the ability to see different perspectives, at least on the gender spectrum? that can be of value to different workplaces. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that I've never looked at doing something within the workplace or even within the community as I'm doing it for what I'm going to get out of it. I've always looked at it from what can I bring to the table that's going to help the community to grow?
Yeah.
And I think that's the mindset that I've had this kind of complaint about for many years about, so-and-so has trans health benefits in their health plan because it's good business.
Mm-hmm.
My personal goal is let's get away from, we're going to do this because it's good for business. We're going to do this because we're all in this together. We're all on this planet together, and we're all human beings. And we need to be treated with dignity and respect.
Right.
And how we translate that and get that across to larger corporations or up the food chain, so to speak, into places where there could be some real policy change. I'm a neophyte on that one. I don't know. I'm learning as I go along.
Yeah.
I know that I can affect change in my little office, and I know that I think when I was on before, I talked about hiring the woman who I hope will eventually take over my practice. She's not a traditional type CPA. She has tattoos all over her body.
Yeah.
She's a little bit on the goth side. She's not somebody that you would normally think of as a CPA, but she fit perfectly into my workplace.
Yes. Yeah.
So how do I expand that out and tell people, and maybe it is, I'm telling other business owners, don't look at what they look like, see what it is they were going to bring to the table for you.
Yeah.
And with you.
Yes.
And how do you bring them in as yes, they're not an owner, and yes, you're, the buck stops with you, and I'm the one that signs the paychecks. Yes, I get that. But I value her input just as much as I value some of the other team members' input. And so we're trying to, how do we make this whole thing better so we all have less stress?
Yeah.
And hopefully at the end of the day, we all also take home a bigger paycheck.
Yeah. So kind of communicating that we are all in this together. It's the right thing to do. Yeah. And I think leading with that, absolutely. That definitely will get more heart-centered folks. Yeah. I think workshopping, how do you get, kind of the more conservative HR director to move away from seeing trans folks, non-binary folks as liabilities and more as assets? And I think you're right. If you can see a person for all that they bring to the workplace, their credentials, their lived experiences, the ability, I always say this when I work with my own clients is if you think of a Nike, you're developing clothing, you just want people to buy your stuff. That's capitalism, whether we want to debate the merits of capitalism or not. That's why they're in business. If you're able to sell more stuff by developing a unisex line of clothing, who's going to develop that for you? Right. So, I think that there's so many ways where we bring so much more than developing clothes into a workplace. It's a big question that I'm playing around with. And so I like to ask guests that are trans and non-binary that question because I feel like collectively we're going to come up with some really good stuff together.
And one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking was that I got to be at a particular, it was a networking event for folks who are sponsors of our local Pride Festival. And there was a young CPA there who works for one of the big CPA companies. And she was so excited to finally meet me. She heard about me and she was just like, oh my God, I'm finally meeting the infamous Rainbow Tax and Accounting, right? Because I have this big name in the LGBT community. And we were having this conversation, and one of the things she said, and her partner also works for a competing big firm in town, and they're both CPAs. And one of the things she was telling me was her friends in her peer group are calling her a sellout. And it's so I guess that's the other side is that, we need those champions in the big companies. We need to not call them sellouts. We need to encourage their work in these larger companies because they're the ones that are going to get the policy changes going through, And she was telling me about how getting just pronouns in their email signatures was months of work, So we need to those people who are choosing to be in a larger corporation and be out and be who they are, we need to support them too.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to take all of us to get to a place where we have healthier workplaces, and there's lots of different workplaces, whether it's you're working for yourself, you've built a big business yourself, or you're working in a larger corporation, it's going to take all of us. So I think thank you for that. I think that's a really good reminder. Okay, Jax, we're going into our bonus round. So are you ready for some quick fire questions?
Sure.
Excellent. Okay, so if your business was a movie, what title would best fit it?
Boy, wow.
Maybe that's it.
Wow, I don't know. I was like, no, I don't really have a movie title for it.
Okay. Well, you can get back, and that could be the title of the episode.
That could be the title of the episode? Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay. So what's a daily habit that helps you stay focused when you're working?
Daily habit that helps me stay focused when I'm working is, I think that probably the biggest daily habit I have is that, don't interrupt that first cup of coffee in the morning. It's kind of my sacred time. And if I don't get that, if I wake up late and have to rush off to a meeting or whatever, I will be frazzled the whole day long.
Yeah.
So having that, I like it to be more than an hour, but if I can get at least an hour of me time in the morning before I head off into my world, that helps a lot. And then the other thing I've noticed is that especially during the busy season, Sunday is sacred, and I do not work. I don't check my email. I don't answer phone calls. I don't care what the deadline is. I don't care who's calling. It could be, somebody who I respect. I was about to say it could be the president of the United States. And it's like, oh, well, I'd ignore a call any day. So that's fine. But
Ellen DeGeneres.
Huh? Ellen DeGeneres. There you go. No, Jodie Foster would be the one.
Okay. Right.
Actually, hers I probably would take a call on Sunday. But that's another story. But, that's the other thing that I do that's more of a weekly issue is that I make sure that I have my me day, my self-care day, and Sunday is about what I need and what I want. And maybe I'll go grocery shopping this week. Maybe I won't.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That makes sense. Is a little bit of mindfulness before all of the.
Especially during tax season, I've noticed that it really makes a huge difference during tax season.
Yeah. That's a great habit. Which historical figure best describes your leadership style?
I would think it would have to be LBJ.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm like a bull in a china shop.
Oh my God. Okay.
I want it my way and I want it now. And
Okay. All right. Cool.
And I think you should all do it the way I want you to do it.
Okay. All right. So what are you most grateful for when it comes to being an outboss?
I think that what I'm most grateful for in that is the intense loyalty that the community has given me. And it's not just the LGBTQ alphabet letter community, but it's the community that I live in, that people I've known my whole life, just that being out and being a boss. I mean, I have to say, I have clients that I've had for 30 years. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
That says a lot.
Yeah.
It says a lot. You've touched on this earlier when we were talking about taxes. I think it might be a really good reminder because I think you might say the same thing. So what's one piece of advice you'd share with our listeners to help them navigate this year's tax season?
Start early. Don't procrastinate. Definitely starting early is going to help them because if, as I suspect the majority of people are going to have tax issues this year, the longer you have between knowing how much you owe the IRS and having to pay it is going to be a lot easier on your budget.
Yes.
If you don't know until April 14th that you owe $4,000 and you don't have $4,000 in your tax return in your bank account, that's a problem. But if you know that the first week of February, the second week of February, just having an idea, you may not be ready to file it, but have enough of an idea what you're looking at. But the people who wait to do it online, the last week before it's due, are going to have some real surprises.
Yeah. And if you file, like if you've traditionally filed online in the past, you said earlier in the interview, this might be the year that you seek professional, like going out just to work with a CPA to make sure that you've done it correctly, or maybe file an extension. Is that something that you would recommend? Or
I think that there's a lot to be said because it'll be hard to find a tax professional who can actually review your tax return before the deadline. So that actually is a good idea if you want to do it yourself. Most of them, like I charge $50 to review a self-prepared return. But if you feel confident that you've done it right, you just want to have a kind of a make sure before you send it, You would file an extension, pay any taxes that are due, then see an accountant of some type in early May or June, and they'll say, yep, it's good, or no, you made this big mistake, and you're actually going to get $1,000 back. So I think because it's a lot easier, especially if you're getting a refund, it's a lot easier and takes less time to get your money if you do it right the first time. Filing an amendment takes 4 to 8 months to process.
Gotcha.
On a good day.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So this is all good stuff. Thank you. And we can be talking for many more hours just to understand all this stuff. But I think we've got a good Cliff Notes version of what we need to do as business owners. So Jax, thank you again for being on the show. Could you say your website so we know where to find you?
We are at rainbowpdx.com.
Okay, so Outbosses, thank you for tuning into this week's episode. It is always my privilege to connect with you and so many inspiring outbosses like Jax. Jax, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you. For details from today's conversation, go ahead and check out the show notes at www.outentrepreneur.com. You can also text 444-999 and type OUTBOSS to stay in touch with the show. As a next step, subscribe to the podcast, consider leaving a rating and review in iTunes, and be sure to share the show with a friend or a loved one. And for now, keep being your authentic selves 100% of the time.